federal judge just seized Donald Trump's assets. And the reason why is the most insane twist yet. We're talking hidden bank accounts, secret money exposed in open court, and a judge who finally said enough, freeze everything. Properties, towers, golf courses, accounts, all locked down in a move legal experts are calling a historic collapse of power. Banks are panicking, the markets are shaking, and Trump's team is in full-blown meltdown mode, trying to stop what looks like a total financial takedown. And the craziest part, this bombshell wasn't supposed to come out today, but now it's blowing up everything. Stay right here.
Guilty of fraud, according to a new ruling in a civil case brought forward by New York's Attorney General Letitia James. Now, this particular civil suit isn't over yet. However, the future proceedings will be far easier considering the ruling that the judge has handed down in regard to the fraud accusations. Now, Judge Arthur Engoron, ruling Tuesday in a civil lawsuit, found that the former president and his company deceived banks, insurers, and others by massively overvaluing his assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork used in making deals and securing financing. In fact, according to AG Letitia James, Trump has overvalued his properties by as much as $2.2 billion. Now, it's interesting to finally get to a point where a judge has weighed in on this, but years ago, we had first gotten word from Trump's one-time personal attorney, Michael Cohen, about this very type of scam. And here was that moment as he was speaking to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez under oath.
I want to ask a little bit about your conversation with my colleague from Missouri about asset inflation. To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
And where would the committee find more information on this? Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
A former president of the United States built his entire image on one story. I'm a genius businessman. I win. I know the system better than anyone. For years, that myth was pumped into our culture through reality TV, gold-plated branding, and those giant letters on skyscrapers. But when you strip away the TV show and actually look at the paperwork, a very different picture shows up. And that's what the New York fraud case did. It took the myth of Trump, the business mastermind, and compared it to the numbers he signed his name under. And the result wasn't genius, it was fraud. Let's start there, because this isn't just about one verdict or one huge fine. It's about the basic idea of fairness in a democracy. If regular people can't lie on a mortgage application without risking prison, why should a billionaire be allowed to inflate his assets by hundreds of millions of dollars and call it art of the deal? That's the core conflict sitting underneath all the legal jargon and political spin. It's not left versus right. It's accountability versus impunity. New York's Attorney General didn't wake up one day and randomly decide to go after Trump for fun. Her office spent years digging through financial statements, loan applications, insurance paperwork, and testimony from people who actually worked for him. They found the same pattern over and over. When Trump needed a bank loan, suddenly his properties were worth the moon and the stars. When it was time to pay taxes, those same properties shrank. On paper, Trump Tower could almost magically grow and shrink, depending on what he needed that day. Think about how basic that scam is. You and I don't get to tell the bank, hey, my house is worth triple what Zillow says, just trust me. We don't get to tell the IRS, actually, this multi-million-dollar property is basically worthless, so I'd rather not pay my fair share this year. But somehow, for a long time, that's exactly how Trump operated.
That Calamari. Now, okay, so Cohen testified under oath. Investigations were launched, and we come to the day today where we hear from this federal judge. Now, beyond mere bragging about his riches, Trump, his company, and key executives repeatedly lied about them on his annual financial statements, reaping rewards such as favorable loan terms and lower insurance premiums, according to the judge, okay? So easiest way to explain this is he would inflate the value of his assets in order to secure the insurance, or in some cases loans, or he would devalue his assets in order to dodge taxes. The lawsuit, which also names two of Donald Trump's adult sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump, and his company as defendants, seeks a fine of $250 million and to sever the Trump family from leading the Trump organization. Trump claimed that a disclaimer on his financial statements absolved him of any wrongdoing. Clearly, the judge didn't buy that argument. Trump's lawyers also had asked the judge to throw out the case, which they then denied, right? And the judge denied it. His lawyers say that James wasn't legally allowed to file the lawsuit because there isn't any evidence that the public was harmed by Trump's actions. Judge didn't buy it. They also argued that many of the allegations in the lawsuit were barred by statute of limitations. Judge didn't buy that as well. The judge also ordered sanctions against Trump's lawyers for making arguments that he previously rejected. He ordered each to pay $7,500 as a result. And in the judge's ruling, in a phase that is known as a summary judgment, it basically resolves the key claims in James's lawsuit, but there are 6 other claims. So this suit will move forward. So Engoron, who's the judge, is slated to hold a non-jury trial starting on October 2nd before deciding on those claims and any punishments he may impose. James is seeking, again, $250 million in penalties.
He lived in a universe where numbers weren't facts, they were tools. And as long as nobody dug too deep, he got away with it. That's why the fraud ruling matters. A judge finally said, no, you can't just make up your own reality on financial documents. This wasn't about his tweets. It wasn't about his rallies. It wasn't about his politics. It was about math, square footage, market value, interest rates, things that don't care whether you wear a red hat or a blue one. And when a court looks at that hard data and says, this crosses the line into fraud, that's a big deal for anybody who still believes that we're supposed to have one set of rules in this country. Now, I know a lot of people hear civil fraud case and their eyes glaze over. It sounds boring, it sounds technical, but here's why you should care. This is the rare moment where the system is actually testing whether someone at Trump's level has to follow the same rules as the rest of us. That's been the question hanging over American politics for years now. Is there such a thing as too rich, too famous, too powerful to be held accountable? And here's something else that's important. This isn't coming out of thin air. Years ago, Michael Cohen was sitting in front of Congress talking about how Trump inflated his assets for insurance purposes. It was on live television. He was under oath. He named names. He pointed lawmakers to specific documents they should review, specific patterns to look for. People laughed him off at the time. Oh, he's just a bitter ex-employee. But later, a lot of what he described was backed up by the evidence in the New York case. So no, this is not a surprise attack. Trump wasn't ambushed by some random paperwork he'd never seen before. This is the fallout from a way of doing business that finally ran into somebody who could say stop and actually make it stick. Now here's where things get messy, and frankly, where bad information starts creeping in from all sides. At one point, the judge imposed a huge financial penalty. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, plus restrictions on Trump's ability to run businesses in New York. That became a huge headline. For a lot of people, that felt like the system finally swinging back at a guy who'd spent his life gaming it. But our legal system has guardrails. That's the whole point. It doesn't just say, we don't like you, so we can take whatever we want. When that massive penalty went up on appeal, the higher court looked at it and said, the underlying fraud finding stands, but the way this penalty was structured goes too far. That's important. It shows that even when the target is Donald Trump, courts still have to follow the Constitution, including protections against excessive fines. And honestly, that's what a healthy rule of law system is supposed to look like. You don't want courts to say, well, the defendant is unpopular, so anything goes. You want them to say, we're going to hold you accountable, but we're going to do it in a way that's grounded in law, not emotion. That's actually good for everyone, not just Trump. What's not good is the way this gets twisted online. On one side, you have MAGA influencers screaming that the appeals court wiped everything out and proved Trump did nothing wrong. That's just false. The fraud finding is still there. On the other side, you've got people exaggerating in the opposite direction, claiming that judges have already seized all of Trump's assets, emptied his bank accounts, and triggered a global market crash. That's also false. And this is where we need to be honest with ourselves. If we're serious about defending democracy, we can't rewrite reality just because we dislike Trump. We don't need to. The actual facts are damning enough. A former president was found liable for persistent, repeated fraud. An appeals court dialed back the dollar amount, but not the underlying conclusion. The state's top law enforcer is still pushing to claw back what she sees as ill-gotten gains. That's already a huge story without adding fake secret bank accounts and instant global asset seizures. Let's talk for a second about those hidden accounts narratives, because they're everywhere. You've probably seen headlines saying a judge suddenly discovered mystery bank accounts Trump never disclosed and immediately froze everything he owns. It sounds dramatic. It gets clicks. But when you actually go look at credible reporting, what you see is much more specific. Disputes about valuations, concerns about whether Trump might move assets around to dodge judgments. Courts discussing monitors and restrictions, sometimes temporary blocks on certain transactions, but not this Hollywood-style scene where a judge hits a red button and all of Trump's wealth gets vacuumed up overnight. And then, layered on top of that, you get people linking this stuff to unrelated events, like a huge crypto crash. They'll say, look, the markets lost billions because a judge froze Trump's accounts. In reality, those losses were driven by things like tariff threats, interest rate fears, leverage unwinding, real economic triggers. We don't need to bend every market movement into proof that Trump's finances were seized by some shadowy court order. That's not journalism. That's fan fiction. The bigger story here is much simpler and much more serious. A pattern of financial dishonesty by a man who held the highest office in the country, and a legal system slowly, sometimes clumsily, trying to figure out how to respond. That's the real drama, not whether some YouTuber can frame it as historic seizure in a thumbnail. Now zoom out with me for a moment, because this case doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a broader pattern. Over and over, Trump has treated rules as something that apply to other people. Election laws, ethics norms, national security processes, and yes, financial regulations. All of them were treated as obstacles to get around, not boundaries to respect. And every time somebody tried to enforce those rules, he didn't just defend himself. He attacked the legitimacy of the people enforcing them. That tactic is dangerous. When he calls every prosecutor a radical left thug, every judge a corrupt hack, every independent investigation a witch hunt, he's not just fighting his own case. He's training his followers to believe the entire justice system is fake unless it rules in his favor. That's classic authoritarian messaging. The leader is pure. Any institution that challenges the leader is corrupt by definition. The financial fraud case is one arena where that battle is playing out. Think about what Trump is really saying when he claims that banks were happy and no one was harmed. He's saying that as long as everyone at the top is making money, lying is fine. He's saying the only victims that count are the lenders. And if they didn't complain, the public should sit down and shut up. But that ignores the ripple effects. When powerful people warp the rules of the financial system, regular people pay for it in higher rates, tighter credit, less trust in the market. Remember the 2008 crash? A huge part of that disaster was built on lies. Safe securities that weren't safe, mortgage documents full of nonsense, ratings agencies rubber stamping junk as gold. When the lies collapsed, ordinary people lost homes, jobs, savings, not the executives who designed the schemes. So when a court today says No, you can't just fabricate asset values on official documents. That's not some abstract legal issue. It's part of the long, unfinished homework assignment from the last financial crisis. Are we actually going to enforce basic honesty at the top of the system? And that brings us back to democracy. You can't have a functioning democracy where one group of people lives under strict rules. Pay your taxes, tell the truth on your forms, don't mislead regulators. And another group lives in a fantasy world where everything is negotiable if you're rich enough. That's not a democracy. That's a caste system with better branding. I want to be really clear here. This is not about hating rich people. This is about equal treatment under the law. If a teacher, a nurse, or a small business owner tried even a fraction of what Trump's company did on those financial statements, they'd be in handcuffs. They wouldn't get a TV show, a presidential term, and an army of media defenders arguing that no one was hurt. They'd get an early morning knock on the door. So when people roll their eyes and say, "Oh, it's just civil fraud in New York," who cares? That's why you should care. Because if we wave this away, we're basically saying, yeah, we expect the wealthy and powerful to cheat. That's just how it is. And once you accept that in finance, it bleeds into everything else. Voting rights, policing, environmental rules, workplace safety. The message becomes the law is flexible for the few and rigid for the many. Here's the good news, if you can call it that. This case shows that the system hasn't completely given up. It's slow, it's messy, it's far from perfect. But judges have looked at Trump's numbers and said, these are lies. An attorney general has put her office's weight behind the idea that those lies matter. An appeals court has stepped in to make sure the punishment stays within constitutional lines, not just emotional ones. That complicated, frustrating process, that's what real accountability often looks like. It's not a movie, it's a grind. And that grind is exactly what authoritarians hate. They don't want independent courts and boring detailed rulings. They want loyalty. They want power to decide outcomes directly. Trump has been very open about that. He's talked about using the Justice Department to go after enemies, about retribution, about purging the civil service and replacing it with loyalists. If he gets back into power and this fraud case is still hanging over him, do you seriously think he wouldn't try to use the machinery of government to shield his business interests? That's why this matters for voters, not just lawyers. When you watch how Trump reacts to legal setbacks, whether it's fraud findings, criminal indictments, or anything else, you're getting a preview of how he thinks power should work. And so far, the picture is very clear. Laws are tools for him to use, not boundaries for him to respect. We need to be better than that. We need to insist on two things at the same time. One, that Trump is not persecuted beyond what the law allows, and two, that he is not protected from the consequences of his own actions because of who he is. That balance is hard. It requires facts, not vibes. It requires patience, not instant gratification. But that's what a pro-democracy position really looks like. So as this story keeps unfolding, appeals, new rulings, maybe new penalties, maybe revised ones, keep your eye on the fundamentals. Did he lie on official financial documents? Courts say yes. Is the system trying to both punish that and stay within legal limits? Yes. Are partisans on both extremes twisting that process into something it's not? Absolutely. You don't have to join either propaganda camp. You can hold a simpler, stronger line. In the United States, the numbers on your financial statements are supposed to mean something. A former president shouldn't get to scribble fantasy values next to his signature and then scream witch hunt when someone calls it what it is. If democracy means anything, it means this: the truth still matters even when it's written in dollars and cents.